Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Cox. I'm the Chief Broadband Officer with the state of Indiana, and I want to welcome everyone to the Indiana BEAD Subgrantee Selection webinar that we've put together. I'm going to have a couple of real super quick announcements that I'm just going to let everybody know. Number one, this is, I feel like, the day we've all been waiting for. Getting subgrantee selection moving forward. It's a really, really crazy exciting time for our office to be able to start moving the process forward, getting awards out, and finally getting some of this work built out, or these networks built out. And we couldn't possibly have done any of this work without input from all of you as partners in this whole process, and obviously working towards getting all of this built. Again, not something we could have done on our own. So really, really, we appreciate all of the work that you as our partners have put into this program as of yet. And with that, I will also tell everybody that pending imminent approval of our challenge process results, we are expecting to launch our application process on December 30th. We were very confident that we were going to be able to get this done and started on by the 23rd of December. Having said that, we were very concerned about opening the grant or the application portal 2 days before Christmas, with a lot of people being out, and if there were any kind of glitches or anything that needed to be worked on with minimal staff available, and probably your staffs as well, we decided to push it back to the 30th. Will be the day that we'll be opening the application portal for everyone. The second piece that I want to add on is initially we had the map up on our connectingindiana.com website. The NTIA requested that we take the map down until we actually have full approval from the NTIA with our challenge process results. So as of right now, the map will not be available to anyone. As soon as we have the approval in hand, we've already spoken with the folks at ready.net, and we will make the map available to everybody at that point in time. You all will get notification that the NTIA approval has happened as soon as we are told. So at that point, feel free to have a look at the map, as well as the address lists that you have in hand, which are provisional as of right now. We don't anticipate making wholesale changes to the address list, the provisional address list, in comparison with the final approved list, unless the NTIA comes back and tells us otherwise. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Megan Miner, who is going to go through our entire webinar here as well. I would just ask all folks, if you have questions along the way, we'll be entertaining questions towards the end of our presentation. If you don't want to hold them to the end of the presentation, please put your questions in the chat and we'll go through them once the presentation has already been made. We have a lot to share today, so we don't want to interrupt the flow of getting all of this information in your hands. We will be recording this, or actually we're recording it as we speak right now, and we will make a video of the webinar available to everybody one way or another in the short-term future. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Megan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Megan Miner, and I am a consultant working in the Indiana Broadband Office on all things BEAD. As Steve mentioned, we have a lot to cover today. So really here is where we're headed in terms of an agenda. We're going to go through an overview and timeline of subgrantee selection. We will walk you through all of the application questions that you will see within the Ready portal, how scoring will work, and then all of your relevant post-submission information. And then we will end with some resources that you can look at asynchronously, and then of course Q&A. And then just to double down on what Steve mentioned, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat throughout. Just in the interest of time, I'm not sure that we'll have time for anyone to necessarily come off of mute at the end to go through those questions. So we'll address first those that are in the chat. And then just know any questions that we receive via chat will also be documented, and we will post in an FAQ document on the website. And as Steve mentioned, this recording will be posted as well as a PDF version of the slides. So you should have all of this available to you if you do need to hop off at some point in time. So with that, we will just jump right in. So as Steve mentioned, very exciting news. We will be kicking off round 1 of subgrantee selection on December 30th. That means that the Ready portal will officially open at 9 a.m. for internet service providers to start submitting that information. So that will just be the opening date. We will certainly be around for any questions that you have. If something comes up on that day or later, reach out to the broadband office if you're having any issues with accessing that. So it is really those internet service providers that participated in pre-qualification itself that are eligible for subgrantee selection. If you did not participate in pre-qualification, there is not another opportunity to submit that documentation. We already have the list of those pre-qualified entities, and they will be the only groups that are eligible for the rounds of subgrantee selection. I will say we have that list of eligible organizations available on the IBO website. So if you are looking to collaborate or just seeing who is eligible, that list is out there. And just want to also say thank you. We saw extremely robust participation in our pre-qualification process, even compared to what other states were seeing. So this was really great news, and we're extremely proud of the participation that we had from our Indiana internet service providers. And then just to circle back on what we talked about during pre-qualification, just because someone is pre-qualified does not mean that they are obligated to participate in any of the rounds of subgrantee selection. It merely means that you have the option to. So if round 1 is not something that you are interested in, you can certainly wait until rounds 2 or 3, and continue thinking about it. That being said, I will just caveat that with providers being able to create their own project areas and really trying to gain significant coverage, we are expecting the first round to be the most robust, most competitive of those rounds. So this is really the best opportunity in terms of the rounds to create, those project areas. So just a quick recap on our challenge process. I won't go through those top couple of lines. I think we have really talked about the extensive, again, participation that we got throughout the challenge process from all of our permissible challengers, including internet service providers. Just wanted to thank you for your patience as we worked through our challenge process results. We wanted those to be as accurate as possible, taking into account everything that happened in the challenge process, every single piece of evidence that was submitted, and then also taking into account the RDOF defaults that have happened in the state, and making sure that our eligible list accounted for all of those locations as well, which I know that this has taken potentially a little bit longer than some of us were anticipating. So we do appreciate your patience on that front. What I really want to highlight is that outcome down at the bottom. So with the list, which is provisional currently, but really expecting that official any minute, hopefully, we are looking at about 144,000 total eligible locations for our BEAD process. We've given you the breakdown there. You will have already seen this in the provisional list that was sent to you as a pre-qualified internet service provider. But now we are all eyes on making sure that every single one of those eligible locations ends up with reliable high-speed broadband service through this program. Steve also mentioned that we do not yet have that Connecting Indiana map up yet. We will be releasing that, and then it will be available for public consumption as well as soon as we get that approval from NTIA. That'll be a pretty quick thing to switch on. Did want to give you a sense of what the map looks like right now. I know sometimes it can be hard to digest just in a CSV file, and this is hard as well because there are so many locations in Indiana, but this at least gives you a general idea of where we are seeing those red or unserved locations and yellow underserved locations, really seeing those rural parts of the state that we're expecting to serve. through these rounds of subgrantee selection. And again, we will send out official notification as soon as we get approval from the NTIA. But again, we're not expecting any significant changes from what we sent from the provisional address list. And then just to talk about the timeline, really the timeline we have firm is that for round 1. So it will open on December 30th. And then in accordance with our volume 2, that round will be open for 5 days. So this is certainly going to be the most extensive of the rounds in terms of the time that is available to prepare and submit the application materials. It means that the round will be closing on February 12th, and all of our challenge process pre-qualification that will close at 11:59 p.m. On that date. So as I mentioned, expecting this to be really the most extensive round of applications and largest kind of swath of projects that we're seeing. We will not have official dates for rounds 2 or potentially 3 until later. What I can tell you right now is that we will be moving very quickly, or as quickly as possible, between rounds to get everything deconflicted, take care of any new enforceable commitments that have come about, taking those off of the eligible address list, school projects, making preliminary awards, so on and so forth. We are hoping to have about 3 to 4 weeks between each round. We will see exactly how that goes, depending on the exact documentation that we have to submit and things like that. Just to prepare you, rounds 2 and 3 will certainly have a different process than round 1. In those rounds, providers are not going to be able to create their own project areas. We'll, take a look at what's left on the map and what coverage was accomplished in round 1 and go from there. And then just to set your expectations, we will be looking at rounds 2 and 3 being a much shorter turnaround time. Think a couple of weeks potentially for those rounds to be open, which is why we're really encouraging this participation in round 1. And just to give you the full picture, we have to complete all of our subgrantee selection, have all of the essential meetings with the NTIA and prospective subgrantees, finish the final proposal, have it out for public comment, and then subsequently submit to the NTIA by the end of June. So we've got a quick time frame now to get all of this done, which is why you're seeing that, more extensive time for round 1 and then shorter turnaround for the subsequent rounds. So we will, of course, keep you posted as we have official dates for those things. And with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Miss, filling out the application as well as the application questions. Maddie, go right ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Megan. For those of you that I have not met, my name is Madison. I also work for a consulting company here in Indianapolis with Megan on all things BEAD. Okay, so we're going to get into the portion about filling out the actual application. So similar to the challenge process and the pre-qualification window, the subgrantee selection application rounds will be completed via the ready.net portal system. All pre-qualified providers have already completed their registration process through pre-qualification. They do not need to re-register your organizations for the subgrantee selection rounds. Just a note that any teammates that you added during the pre-qualification round will still have access to your organization's BEAD applications. So just keeping that in mind in case you want to shift those people around. And additionally, you may also choose to add new teammates to your organization profile to complete the application process if needed. So the following slides are going to be sort of a how-to to navigate the subgrantee selection portal, which again, hopefully you'll find at least somewhat familiar. So once you log in using your regular credentials, you will open up the portal to find this landing page. The home feature is where you'll find all your quick links to the organization profile information, teammates, IBO resources, and of course your BEAD applications. So to access those for the ones that your organization has started or to create a new one, you'll go ahead and click the button there circled in red, the View BEAD Applications. And then you'll be directed to the next slide, which you will find, again, circled in red there, to start a new application, or from this page, you'll be able to begin that new one, a net new, as well as view any active or ongoing applications started by your organization. So just a note here that you do not need to complete an application all in one fell swoop. The portal will automatically save your work so that you can revisit as many times as you might need. And then additionally, you'll notice even in this screenshot here that there are several applications going at one time. So just a note that you can submit as many applications as needed or wanted during round one. And they can also include as many or as few census blocks as each provider prefers. So starting a new application for a project area, you would go ahead and click begin a new application, and you'll be prompted with this pop-up to name whatever that application looks like. So you can use any naming conventions that might feel correct for you. Just be sure to be clear and distinct so that you can distinguish between those applications within your own organization. And then moving along, after creating an application, you'll just go ahead and click through to create new application, and it'll prompt you to the next piece, which the next several slides are going to detail the round one application content, instructions for how to complete each of the sections. And if you have questions again that come up throughout these slides, please feel free to enter them into the chat. They'll be read aloud during the Q&A portion, and we'll circle back to make sure that everything is really thoroughly answered. So the round one application is going to consist of the sections outlined on this slide. And we just wanted to point out that in addition to this presentation, the IBO has posted the full subgrantee selection guidance document that provides a written guide for ISPs to reference while completing the application process. And it hopefully it aligns just with this presentation and kind of gives you the written sort of materials that will go right along with this information. So if you don't get everything, if you're taking notes, don't worry, that document has been posted, and please let us know if you've got questions. Okay, so diving into the bulk, here we go. The first section of the round one process is the project application selection portion. So proposed project areas must be comprised of contiguous census blocks. That is the lowest geographical level that the IBO opted to use for IBOs to, or for ISPs to be able to select their project areas. So as you'll see on this screen, when selecting a census block, the applicant is committed to reaching all unserved and underserved locations within that census block. So proposed project areas are required to include every unserved and underserved. But in addition to all of those, applicants are permitted to include served locations, just not to exceed 20% of their total proposed project area. So if needed, a provider may pass through a fully served census block to connect two non-contiguous areas. And then any served locations that you plan to have within your project area will be provided as a CSV file within the portal during this section. So it should also be noted that the round one time is the only time during subgrantee selection that providers have the ability to create their own project areas. As Megan mentioned, subsequent rounds will sort of be determined based on the remaining eligible locations that the IBO determines. And that'll happen after round one is complete. Of course, we will be conducting deduplication during rounds. So we will let you know more information about that as we sort of get there. Okay, so there are several ways for applicants to create a project area within the Ready.net portal. The first method is to utilize the interactive map in the portal that is preloaded with census block configurations and the eligible location data appropriately loaded, which you all have access to provisionally through that list. So that will match exactly what, hopefully, what we have put out, and any changes we'll let you know. So the second is to manually enter the census blocks your organization would like to include in the proposed project area, or you may upload an Excel CSV file of the census block IDs in the format listed in the ready.net portal. So just a note that in any of these scenarios, after the census blocks have been selected, the Ready system will provide your organization with a downloadable list of location IDs to which you have committed to serve within those proposed project areas. So this slide might be redundant for several of you on this call, but we have gotten some questions recently regarding CostQuest and just the underlying data generally speaking. So we thought it would probably be pertinent to include a few words on this. So for those that might not be familiar, to administer the BEAD program effectively, Indiana was required to enter into a licensing agreement with CostQuest Associates, and they are the company that owns the location level data set used to create the FCC broadband map. Now, because of this agreement, the broadband office cannot fully release this data to internet service providers unless they first obtain their own CostQuest licenses. This licensing requirement ensures compliance with the terms of use with the data set. So as a result, the IBO is unable to provide a singular file that ties both addresses and location IDs together, which was a common request during the challenge process, as an example. However, there is good news for ISPs. You are all able to receive a free CostQuest license, which can be obtained just by requesting through them. So on the next slide, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but just as an overview, these licenses are a pretty critical tool to support providers as you try to navigate the BEAD program and just ensure the accuracy of the broadband coverage data. So while a CostQuest license is not necessarily required and you don't really need it to go through to complete the application process, I would like to note that it is extremely helpful for being able to do meaningful project analysis outside of the ready.net portal. So think about for even just like planning, current applications and future projects that might also make sense along with the BEAD program. So who should get a CostQuest license and how do you request one? A CostQuest license is particularly useful again for providers who have the technical resources to complete data matching. As mentioned, we cannot provide a singular file that has location IDs to addresses, and it's probably a good thing to note that the data set is quite large and can be semi-difficult to work with, and it probably does require a fairly significant lift to ingest and to navigate. So just want to put that caveat there. But if your organization is looking to analyze potential project areas outside of the Ready system, having a CostQuest license would be incredibly helpful as it gives you access to the location level data that you need to conduct those. So requesting a license for those who may not have one already, there are several types of licenses, two specific to ISPs. Those participating in the subgrantee selection process would specifically request the Tier D license. This is just the one that would align best with what we'll be doing. So to request that Tier D license, you can head to the link on this slide. And again, these will be posted later on. So that is the CostQuest spiel. And it's relatively straightforward. Once you've secured the license, your organization just gets access to the files and then can conduct analysis outside of that system again. This would be particularly helpful for those who want to upload a list of census blocks, just as a note there. So with that in mind, regardless of whether you choose to obtain a CostQuest license or not, as I mentioned, it is not entirely pertinent as the functionality in the ready.net portal has been designed to accommodate several project selection modalities. I kind of went over those a few slides ago already. So this is just a screenshot, a more in-depth like visual that that just walks through the selection options. So the first that you'll see there is for applicants to click directly on the map to select the census blocks that they would like to include in a proposed project area. So applicants using this feature will notice that the Ready map automatically populates a list of locations included in the selected project area. And they will just populate there on the right side of the screen. And then options 2 and 3 are also open to use. They're located in that side pane as well. Those options allow applicants to select projects by manually entering their project area census blocks directly into the text box option, or by uploading an Excel CSV containing the census block IDs. And for those who are interested in uploading the example Excel files that are in ready.net, the ready.net portal, those have examples for formatting so that they're really clear and you can just upload super easily. So as mentioned, projects must be contiguous, and this slide is just a demonstration of the ready.net functionality showing what a contiguous versus non-contiguous project area looks like. And to be considered contiguous, the borders of 2 or more census blocks just must be touching in some fashion, even if it's just a corner, which is in that second from left screenshot there in the center. And then all the way on the right is what would be considered non-contiguous. We're just really looking again for those to be touching in some fashion. Yeah, you understand that one. So it's also important to note that if a proposed project area contains or crosses any physical boundaries or natural boundaries, which can include things like lakes, interstate highways, or other physical boundaries, applicants should select the census block or the barrier itself as part of their project area to connect to another census block to ensure that the project remains contiguous. So even though there are no locations included in these barriers themselves, it just helps you branch from one to the next and keeps your area contiguous so that you might not need to start an additional application. It's more for the sake of ease. Okay, so moving on from the project selection portion of the application into the next, which is project details. This portion covers the technical components. I think I misspoke. If I said we're in the project technical details section. And this really does cover the technical components of the proposed project, consisting of information like the technology types proposed, speed and latency, and speed to deployment. So to complete this section, applicants will first be asked to provide the technology type or types that their organization intends to use in the proposed project area. So the portal does allow applicants to select one or multiple options from the drop-down list, and those technology types will include fiber, cable modem, licensed fixed wireless, unlicensed fixed wireless, and low Earth orbit satellite. Making note of that, regardless of the technology type selected, all applicants will be prompted to enter the latency speed in milliseconds of the broadband service to be provided in that proposed project. So additionally, applicants using non-fiber projects will be asked to provide their maximum download and upload speeds that their proposed technology will provide to each location within the project area. And then applicants will enter in those speeds into text boxes as they appear with the technology selection. So as you're moving through the Ready portal, once you select your technology, appropriate text boxes will populate as you make those selections. So you do not need to guess. They automatically populate for you depending on which technology type or types you select. The next question within the project technical details section is for applicants to upload a narrative document describing how their organization intends to increase their overall capacity to provide high-speed broadband in their proposed project areas as new customers are added to the network. So this narrative should really demonstrate the organization's ability to accommodate new customers as proposed at the proposed speeds indicated in the question we just talked about. This question is really getting at each applicant's plan for sustainability to ensure that the network can continue to grow as needed as customers are added. So subsection 2 of the project technical details portion is where applicants will determine and disclose the timeline of their proposed project deployment. Just as a note, as per the BEAD NOFO, proposed timelines must not span more than 48 months or the equivalent of 4 years from the date of signing their subaward agreement. So, and also as a note, this is a scored component of the application. And we will get into scoring much later in the presentation, but I promise we will get into detail about what that actually looks like. So the final question of this section is actually just a text box acknowledging the potential for penalties if project timelines extend beyond what was agreed upon initially at the time the subaward was made. So if your organization committed to, you know, a 12-month build out, you would need to obtain prior approval for any changes to that proposed timeline or become, you know, potentially subject to penalties there. It's just something that we have to add. But yes, keep in mind that that prior approval must be obtained before any changes. So if you have an ambitious timeline and you're thinking, okay, maybe we need to move this up, yeah, just remember to get prior approval. Okay, so moving along, the next section of the application is the project financial details. And this section, applicants will enter 2 really key dollar figures. The first number is the proposed amount their organization is requesting in BEAD subsidized dollars to complete their proposed project area. So this is the amount that you are asking for in BEAD dollars. And the second amount is the applicant organization's matching funds, which of course must be at least 25% of the total project cost. So these 2 amounts combined should equal the total project cost. As an example, if a provider has in dollars and chooses to contribute the minimum 25%, then those 2 amounts would look like 750,000 in that first entry as the requested amount of BEAD funds, and then $250,000 as the provider match to equal that $1 million example. And then any iterations of what that might look like, but those are the 2 key dollar figures here. So in addition to the funding amounts, the IBO does request that applicants upload a detailed breakdown of their proposed project budget. I realized we've gotten several questions on this, so I just wanted to break this down as clearly as possible. This budget should include items such as administrative and legal expenses, structure, permitting, planning, maintenance, and other sort of miscellaneous expenses to be incurred during project deployment. Applicants should also include an accompanying narrative that provides a clear justification for each line item. As far as the upload requirements for this section, really an Excel file for a line item budget is more than acceptable. And similarly, a relatively short and concise narrative that just overviews you know, sort of what you include in your budget in each line item, just so that we understand where those figures are coming from. The final question in the project financial details section is about affordability. So in compliance with Indiana's Volume 2, applicants must submit their planned total monthly cost to consumers, including all taxes, fees, and charges. And of course, this question is dependent on the proposed technology type selected earlier in the application process. For example, if an applicant has a proposed fiber project, this monthly cost amount should be based on a gigabit symmetrical plan. But for applicants submitting a project with non-fiber technologies, this monthly cost should be reflective of a 100/20 plan. And so when submitting this number, applicants are committing to this plan pricing in the project area. And as time goes on, the IBO will allow for adjustments to this commitment as it relates to inflation and other cost items there. So just as a note. Okay, the next section is the optional scored material section, and it is pretty much exactly as it sounds. Optional, but a really phenomenal opportunity to add points to your organization's overall application score. So the first of 2 prompts in this section focuses on letters of support. To encourage statewide collaboration, local governments have been strongly encouraged to meet with potential applicants to discuss their BEAD project plans, and then if they so choose, to write judicious letters of support for projects that they feel make sense in their communities. I just wanted to hit on a few key points on letters of support here. So while local governments are encouraged, they are not obligated to support any applicant in this process, but they can choose to support none, one, or multiple applicants for a proposed project area or areas. So if they wanted to provide a letter of support for a singular project area, that's acceptable, or they could provide it for multiple. They may also be providing letters of support to additional applicants. They have that freedom to do so. So without getting into too much detail here, the letters can contribute up to 5 points towards an application score, depending on the level of detail provided. And again, scoring will be discussed at length just later in this presentation. But for now, I do think it's important to note that any valid letters of support must come from local officials, and those people can include county commissioners, county council members, auditors, mayors, city council members, just people in the community who have those sort of roles. Okay, I know that the IBO has already received several questions about this part of the application, so I'm going to do my best to be really clear about the differences between this optionally scored narrative and the second but separate workforce details narrative that we will get into in a few slides. So for this optionally scored section, applicants do have the opportunity to upload a narrative outlining their commitment to using a highly qualified workforce for their proposed project area. Now, again, this narrative is distinct from the NTIA's required narrative about having an appropriately skilled workforce, but Indiana opted to instead focus on this piece for efforts that go above and beyond the minimum qualifications for the roles. So just to provide some examples of what might qualify here for this specific narrative, also outlined in volume 2, includes participation in apprenticeship programs, implementation of specialized training programs, partnerships with community organizations such as Ivy Tech or other local training providers that you might have partnerships with. Really, this is just a really great opportunity for applicants to demonstrate their dedication to workforce excellence and to highlight how they're investing in long-term success of the project and the communities that they serve at large. We expect to probably have some further discussion around this, but wanted to really try and highlight the differences between the two there. And again, I'll get into the second one later in the slides. So this section should hopefully look a little bit familiar to many of you. During the pre-qualification process, ISPs had the option to submit their cybersecurity and supply chain risk management plans as part of their materials. If your organization did not submit these plans during the pre-qualification window, these are now required to include as part of the full application process. However, for those who did already submit these plans during pre-qualification, a bit of good news, you do not need to resubmit as they have already been accounted for in the portal. So we have gotten a lot of questions about these plans as well. And if you need assistance with them, please reach out and we can connect you with the NTIA resources that outline what is required from each of these plans. They do seem really daunting, but I promise they're not as bad as you would think. And we are more than happy to help you out with any questions that you might have on these. Okay, moving right along into the business and financial planning section. As required by NTIA, every applicant must submit a business plan and supporting analyses to demonstrate the long-term stability of their proposed project areas. So to meet this requirement, applicants can include in this portion documents like pro forma statements or other similar financial analyses. However, I do want you to be aware of a few very specific required elements. So firstly, to name one, the cash flow and balance sheet projections. Another is at least 3 years of operating costs and cash flow projections following the completion of the project. And really, these details just aim to show that the project isn't just feasible in the short term, but will remain financially viable into the future. So next are the requirements for letters of credit and performance bonds. Applicants are required to submit either a letter of credit or a letter guaranteeing a performance bond as part of their full application. So firstly, a letter of credit must be equal to at least 25% of the subsidy amount that you are requesting on behalf of your organization. But alternatively, a performance bond must cover 100% of the subsidy amount requested. Also, please note that these letters must be good for 6 years. For guidance, the IBO has an example letter of credit on the website to help anybody navigate this requirement. And additionally, the NTIA has established a letter of credit waiver and provides additional guidance online, which is also here on this slide. So if your organization is interested in pursuing any waiver options, please, it is so important to discuss with the IBO before submitting your application. So if this is something that you are looking to exercise, after this presentation, it would be really great to connect with the IBO and maybe get some time on the calendar just to discuss what that might look like for your organization. Okay, we're getting close to the end. The technical capabilities section is next, and it's rather short. This section is just where applicants will need to submit the following materials via a narrative upload. So a network design and diagram that clearly outlines the proposed infrastructure of the project, detailed project costs, including a build-out timeline with clear milestones for project implementation, and a capital investment schedule that shows the project will achieve complete build-out within those 4 years. It is important to note that all of these materials must be certified by a professional engineer, which is also outlined in Indiana's Volume 2. So look there for some further clarification. This certification must state from the professional engineer that the proposed network is capable of delivering broadband service that meets all of the performance requirements for every location within that project area. Next, we will cover the BABA and EHP application requirements in the adherence to environmental and historic preservation section. So here, applicants are asked to provide brief narrative responses explaining how their organization plans to adhere to the Build America, Buy America program. And that just really tries to ensure that materials used in federally funded projects such as BEAD are primarily made in the United States. There is, however, an exemption option for this requirement, and if you believe that your organization qualifies, that's fine. You'll just need to include the details of this exemption in your narrative. There's some more information on the BABA requirements and exemptions on this slide. And if you have any questions, of course, please reach out. Additionally, applicants will need to include a narrative response on the EHP, the environmental and historic preservation requirements. So the EHP requirements just ensure that broadband projects comply with environmental protections and consider the preservation of historic sites. So any of those areas that might be included in your project areas. But here are some additional details on this slide on the EHP front as well. So if you are awarded, or if your project area is awarded, you will need to conduct a National Environmental Preservation NEPA analysis. And this just ensures that projects comply with environmental regulations. And the required information may include details related to clean water and air protection, things like farmland protection, environmental justice considerations, flood plans, et cetera, the use of toxic substances. Not all of these may be directly related to your project areas, but if selected, it is a requirement. So currently, though, as a note, as you'll be going through the application process in the portal right now, there is only a check. It's a radio button check that you will comply with the requirement if awarded. And the last portion of this section is related to the National Risk Index rating. And applicants are required to determine whether their project area falls within a census tract that has a National Risk Index rating of relatively moderate or higher. So if you are not sure about whether your project area contains one of these census tracts, you will go ahead and use the link on the screen to check that rating. And if any part of your proposed project does have a census tract located within it with a rating of, again, relatively moderate or above, you'll need to include a brief narrative just describing the climate resilience and mitigation measures that you plan to implement to offset this. So this just ensures that the proposed broadband infrastructure is prepared to withstand those environmental risks and challenges that might be specific to the geographical area. Okay, this is the final requirement that we'll cover, and it involves workforce details. So again, a few slides ago, we went over the optionally scored materials that has a separate narrative from what we're about to discuss here. Starting under the first section, workforce details from left to right, applicants must provide in this section details of their organization's plans to ensure that all workers involved in the project area proposed are appropriately skilled and credentialed. So specifically in that, you'll need to outline training programs that they might or that your employees might undergo, the credentials and certifications required to obtain one of these roles, and any other qualifications that demonstrate that your workforce truly is prepared to tackle the BEAD projects proposed. Just as a note, if your organization uses an internal only training program, that's totally fine, but you will need to provide clear details on how this program ensures workers are appropriately skilled and equipped to meet the project's technical and performance standards outlined. So again, this does differ from the highly skilled workforce portion, as this section refers to just the basic level of training that one worker must have to work on a BEAD-funded project. So the goal here overall is to really demonstrate that the workforce delivering these projects has the expertise needed to ensure success by just providing proving that the training is adequate to produce appropriately skilled individuals. Those details might differ, of course, and just use your best judgment on what you think is appropriate for proving that. And then if we need additional details, the IBO will reach out and let you know. So Okay, that's the workforce details portion. Next, the center subcontractor information portion. If your organization plans to use subcontractors on your project, you will need to provide specific details about each one. And this includes details like resumes of key personnel and information on their role and the capacity on the BEAD build out front. So additionally, applicants might indicate whether any subcontractor organizations are minority owned or women owned businesses in that application as well. And you can just denote that in that upload right there. And then finally, we will cover the requirements related to union information right there on the right. Applicants are asked whether their workforce is unionized, and if the answer is no, you will need to provide several details to ensure the workforce meets the necessary standards outlined by the BEAD requirements. These details in the narrative would include a list of job titles and the size of your full-time employee workforce. And for each job title, a description of the safety training, certification, and licensure requirements. And of course, information about any professional certifications required for those roles. And really, this information just helps demonstrate that your workforce, unionized or not, have the qualifications and training that would be needed to deliver the project safely and effectively. And then, okay, so thank you all so much for bearing with me there. I realized that was a lot of information. Again, we will have time for questions, and don't forget about the guidance document that walks through what I just covered step by step. And now I'm happy to hand it back to Megan for the scoring component, and thank you all so much.
All right, so jumping right into application scoring, one thing that I want to first differentiate between specifically as it relates to scoring, per the NTIA, really, there are two types of projects within the BEAD program. The first of these are priority broadband projects, which you may have heard us use this term previously, and it is laid out in our volume 2. But priority broadband projects are those that use fiber end to end. It is 100% fiber to the consumer. The BEAD program prefers fiber technology. So this is going to be the preference for projects. Those are priority projects. Think of those as 100% fiber. Then there are also other last mile broadband projects. And so this is where everything else falls. So this could be any of the other allowable technology types, or if you're planning to use fiber in part and another technology type. If it is not 100% fiber, if there is fiber with something else, it's going to be considered that other last mile broadband project. So let's say that we were to get two applications for the exact same project area, and one was a priority broadband project and one was an other last mile broadband project, then we would have to choose that fiber project effectively. So this comes into play with scoring. You will see that there are two different sets of matrices for scoring depending on the type of project. So just to show that to you, this is what it looks like for priority projects, and we're going to jump into the individual breakdown of those points as well. So again, these are the completely end-to-end fiber projects. And then these are the other last mile projects. Where we've highlighted in green here, those are the only categories that are different for the other last mile projects than priority. So affordability, Madison already covered that, and we'll hit on that again, but how the question is worded is just a little bit different in terms of what they're looking at there. And then on other last mile projects, we add the category of speed of network and other technical capability that is scored. And so that gets 1.5 points and reduces the points for speed to deployment. So going through these, some of those overarching categories are separated out into subcategories. So I'll try to be really clear about that where I can. And I also want to show you really the exact calculations that are going to be going on for these. So starting at that top, the minimum BEAD program outlay, 40 of the 45 total points available for minimum BEAD outlay are going to be awarded based on the BEAD outlay per eligible location. So this calculation is only going to include those unserved and underserved locations, not any served locations that you've added to the project area. So you'll see that there are two calculations here, and that is because this is scored first by calculating each individual project or applicant's BEAD outlay per passing in that project area. And then the second equation that's there on the bottom is really how you get to the score. So what we wanted to do, because all project areas are so different across the state, depending on what's included, the geography of the area, other challenges that might make, one place a lot more expensive in terms of BEAD outlay, we wanted to make sure that we were comparing apples to apples. And so looking at within a single project area, the same project area, what applicant has the lowest. So that's the calculation that you're seeing on the bottom. Points would then be assigned based on an individual applicant score compared to the lowest applicant for that area. So I know that this is a little bit confusing to look at in this way, but I think it makes a lot more sense. Makes a lot more sense when you do it in an example. So here we're comparing, let's say 3 applicants that are all bidding on the same project area. 100% of these numbers are totally made up, so don't get too attached to them on that front. But this is basically laying out if each of them have a different BEAD outlay per eligible location in that project area. $3,400 per eligible location is obviously the cheapest of those, has the lowest BEAD outlay. So everyone would then be subsequently assigned points on how far away they are from that lowest option. So what you're seeing there in the scores is exactly that calculation from the first slide, basically showing their own individual BEAD outlay compared to the lowest one. And so then you'll see that whoever the applicant is that has the lowest BEAD outlay per eligible location for that specific project area would receive those full points. And then everyone else would receive a portion of the points based on how far away they are from that lowest option. And then the final 5 points for minimum BEAD outlay are awarded based on the match percentage. So 25% is the minimum required, but we certainly encourage applicants to have an even higher portion that they are contributing. Remember that this can also include in-kind match, which we can send out additional resources on that if you have questions. But this is just the breakdown of how that scoring would work. So if you have that minimum 25%, that is great. That is meeting the requirement, but it would receive a score of 1, and then you will receive more and more points, kind of the higher up you go in terms of the percentage of the project funded by the applicant. The next section is affordability, and this is worth 20 points. On the same slide here, we've given you the breakdown of scoring for those priority projects, so 100% fiber, and then the other projects. So on the left-hand side of the screen, again, that's fiber, and you'll be answering this question based on gigabit symmetrical, a monthly package for gigabit symmetrical. And basically scoring here will start at $100 or less per month, including all of those taxes, fees, and charges. So if an applicant committed to $100 a month all in for a gigabit symmetrical plan, then they would receive the full 20 points. And effectively, applicants then lose 1 point for every 5% higher than $100 a month they go. So that would be calculated based on how much higher it is than $100. And then very, very similar premise for those other last mile projects. Instead, this is going to be a 100/20 monthly package, and that kind of benchmark is going to be at $70 or less, and then again going to lose 1 point for every 5% higher than $70 a month for that cost to the consumer. And then just to give you a bit of an example there, if someone said their cost for that gigabit symmetrical service was $150 a month, this is how the calculation would play out, and they would just get a portion of those 20 points. This is how it would be calculated. All right, then we move into the fair labor practices section. This is 15 points, and it's broken up into 3 sets of 5. 2 of the 3 categories are actually based on materials that were submitted during pre-qualification. So all of you have already submitted those and do not need to resubmit for scoring. That will follow you through all of the rounds of subgrantee selection that you participate in. So 5 points were awarded based on the narrative response displaying past compliance and future compliance with federal labor and employment laws. So if you completed that narrative, that is 5 points there. And then 5 points were also awarded to all applicants that did not have any OSHA violations within the past 3 years. So again, all of that information has already been submitted, and that same content and score will follow you for all 3 rounds. And then this is the optional narrative. And I think Madison did a great job talking about this in terms of the content. Again, this is where you can get, again, those 5 points for the optional highly skilled workforce question. This is going to be something that is above and beyond what is minimally required. This is your opportunity to talk about really intentional or above and beyond partnerships or training programs or certifications that you have for your employees that really show a dedication to labor for that project area. The next section is about service levels in project areas. And so this is another that is separated out into 2 subcategories. So it's 12 points overall. And the first of those are the unserved percentage, and that's worth 10 points. So basically, an applicant is going to receive more points here for the portion of their project area that is unserved. So the more unserved locations that are involved in that project area, the better. So this is only going to look at unserved and underserved locations. We'll basically calculate what percentage of the total eligible locations in your project area are unserved. So for example, if 80% of the project area is unserved, you would receive 8 of the points here. And then next, this is going to also, this is going to take into account that up to 20% served locations that you can include in your project area. So here the calculation is instead going to be out of the total locations in the project area and looking at the served percentage. Again, you can, per the BEAD notice of funding, include up to 20% served. However, you're going to have kind of higher scoring for the lower amount of served locations. And I will say that the READY system is quite slick and has some great error checking. As you actually upload your list of served location IDs that you want to include in the project area, it will tell you, the total number that you can have up to that 20%. So it can help you understand kind of where you're falling in this potential scoring. The next one I wanted to hit on was the letter of support. So this is another one of the optional pieces. Maddie gave some really great details about who is eligible to actually write that letter of support. You can only have 1 letter of support that is scored. You can include more if you have them, but only 1 is, you're not going to get additional points for every letter of support that you have. 1 is going to get you kind of up to the maximum that you can have. The content in the letters themselves will be scored. So we have been trying to make this really clear to any local government officials that we talk to. There are also some pieces of guidance out on the Indiana Broadband Office website. But just to go through those, a really basic letter of support that doesn't have a ton of specific information or detail in it, that is really quite short, that is not going to receive the full 5 points. That is just going to receive 1 point total. To get those additional points and get all the way up to the 5 total possible points, the first way to do that is to add details about meeting or correspondences that have taken place between that local government entity and the internet service provider. So talking about when meetings occurred, what was discussed, who was there, or if this has taken place during via phone or email. Any of those kinds of details are going to get you an additional 2 points, so up to 3 total points then. And then the final way to get those final 2 points would be a justification for support. So some kind of well-reasoned justification for supporting the applicant, as well as the details on meeting or correspondence to get that full 5 points. This is going to be really, really individual for the particular project area. It could be that an internet service provider has been a great partner to that specific community before, and they're looking to expand their partnership. That is a great, well-reasoned justification if there's an existing partnership there, or if they're really excited by the technology type or the speed to deployment potentially is going to get their area service the quickest. Those are all the types of things, but there just has to be some kind of justification showing that there has been communication and thought from the local government entity about this letter of support. I will say that the same local government entity or individual may be writing multiple letters of support depending on how the project areas fall. If you split those project areas up, that is certainly allowable, but just remember 1 letter per project area is really what's going to get you the points associated with this. And then just a couple more to break down here. The next is speed to deployment. This is a pretty simple one. This is based on what you submit in terms of the number of months from subgrant agreement being signed to service actually being deployed, and what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen versus the right-hand side of the screen. This is the breakdown of the scoring for priority projects, so that end-to-end fiber versus last mile projects, so any other technology type. A pretty straightforward scoring piece. And then to speed of the network, this is going to only apply to other last mile projects. This does not apply to fiber projects only. So again, another pretty straightforward piece of scoring based on the highest speed that you submit during the application process. So those are all of the scored pieces of the application and what scoring looks like. Again, just to circle back so that you can see that full scoring rubric, this is what it looks like added all together on the priority projects. And then this is what it looks like on the other last mile projects. We've certainly got this available on the website, so please let us know if you have any questions about the scoring breakdown. And then finally, just to wrap this up, I appreciate your patience. I know that this is a lot of content around subgrantee selection, so I appreciate you hanging in there with us. Wanted to go over some post-submission information. This has quite a few topics in it, just so you know what's coming after applications actually get submitted. So first thing I want to talk about is the deconfliction of project areas. So deconfliction is what happens when there are 2 non-identical project areas that are submitted by more than 1 applicant that have an overlay of a census block or multiple census blocks. So this is really relevant because if it was the exact same project area applied for, the exact same census blocks, we would just use the entire scoring matrix and the entire project area would get, awarded to a single internet service provider. So what we're really looking at here are those census blocks where just a portion of that project overlaps with another one. So how deconfliction will work: first, it will only happen when the projects use the same technology type. So if one of those submitted was a completely fiber project and one was an other last mile broadband project, we have a preference for fiber. So that fiber project, if they overlap, is going to really take that. But if there are 2, completely fiber projects that are overlapping in that census block, that's when we're going to look to do this deconfliction process. I have some diagrams that I think really help. So just, I guess, starting on the right-hand side of the screen, if you have 2 applicants that submit the exact same project area, this is totally fine. That's when we would use that full rubric to determine that project area. That's what it's there for. What we're looking at is on the left-hand side of the screen, when something like this gets submitted, so where we just have to figure out who gets awarded that striped census block that both have applied for. You're not they still have project area remaining outside of that census block. This is when deconfliction would take place. So as outlined in volume 2, we do have a formula for deconflicting. Effectively, that is going to come down to the BEAD outlay per passing for that specific project area. And ultimately, the proposal with the lowest BEAD outlay per passing will be awarded that conflicting census block. And then we do have some backup options if they have the exact same BEAD outlay per passing, then we consider project match and so on and so forth. What I will say is that this is not something that is going to just automatically happen and then a piece of your project area, if you do not, come out with the lowest outlay in that deconfliction, you're not going to be surprised when preliminary awards come out that that piece has been taken away. This will be a very transparent process where we will talk to any providers that have an overlapping project area before even preliminary awards are made. Let them know about the fact that deconfliction will be taking place. And then if deconfliction occurs, we would talk to that provider that is having that census block potentially taken out of their project area before awarding anything to make sure that it is still sustainable and that that is something that they would still move forward with. So this will be certainly something conversational and not something that you are obligated to see at your preliminary award. So just wanted to let you know that we will be communicative about that process of deconfliction. Next, which we have gotten some questions on recently, I do want to talk about the extremely high cost threshold versus high cost areas. So the extremely high cost threshold, which I'm sure most of you have heard us talk about previously, is basically a per location dollar amount that each state gets to set. And it's where that preference for fiber no longer exists. It's where fiber is so expensive to take end to end that it actually makes more sense to choose another technology type, even though we got a fiber proposal for that area. So every single state has the opportunity to set this threshold with what makes sense for them. And it's really a way to optimize the use of funds so that we're not taking, fiber places where it's really, exceedingly expensive and that we could certainly cover with another technology sufficiently for cheaper. So the NTIA wants this to be as high as possible so that we do get fiber places, but still making sure that we have enough funds to reach every single eligible location. So we have done preliminary analysis with all of the data from Next Level Connections and other programs at the state. So we have a model that is laid out in volume 2 for how we calculate the extremely high cost threshold. However, to be as accurate as possible, we will be taking the data that comes in during the first round of subgrantee selection, which is something that we're seeing a lot of the other states do as well to make sure that it is accurate. And really quickly turning around that analysis with the data that we've received so that we can set a very, very reasonable, extremely high cost threshold that will then be used for all rounds. So again, just to be really clear, the extremely high cost threshold is really just that point that we can calculate where we can prefer a non-fiber project over a fiber project. So that is really an internal use kind of number that we will be calculating really as soon as the first round closes. The other piece that you might hear are high cost areas because these sound very, very similar. So high cost areas are actually something that the NTIA set in 2023 before each state's BEAD allocation was even announced. These areas were determined by a cost model at the NTIA that had a lot of inputs and was really meant to identify places where it might be more expensive to deploy service. That being said, the state of Indiana only had 2 high cost areas that the NTIA determined with their cost model. The Indiana Broadband Office did not have input into this cost model. These were purely NTIA determined high cost areas, and those are the 2 census block groups that are on the screen. So the NTIA does allow states to waive the match requirement if needed for projects in these high cost areas that the NTIA determined. That would have to happen in conversation with the Indiana Broadband Office, but I did just want to distinguish between extremely high cost threshold and high cost areas on this one. And then finally, just a couple more things here to go through. So award announcements, just to talk you through what this is going to look like. The IBO will finalize scores for all applications. We'll start on a rolling basis with what we have, and then as soon as we can after each round concludes, and that includes all of those deconfliction processes or anything else that needs to take place. At that point, the IBO will deliberate, look at those scores, and choose preliminary awards after each round. These are kind of NTIA terms that they use for throughout this entire process. So just want to be clear in case you're reading any documentation and you see these. So at the time that preliminary awards are made, the IBO will notify all providers that participated in the round about the preliminary awards, but there will not be a public announcement. These will not have been run by the NTIA yet. And so that is not something that we can release publicly. We will let the providers know, but it's not something that is able to be announced either by the IBO or by the providers that participate. After all rounds are completed, then, so after either the second or third round, depending on which one ends up being the last round, the IBO will have a meeting with the NTIA. And at that point, if the NTIA says, yes, these look okay provisionally, preliminary awards will move to provisional awards. It is at that point that the IBO can announce those publicly and post the final proposal, which will include data about all of the awards that were given. So we move from preliminary to provisional at that point. Then the final proposal will be out for public comment for a period of time. And then the Indiana Broadband Office will submit it and all of the data documentation to the NTIA. Awards only become final once the final proposal actually has official NTIA approval. So there are going to kind of be 3 stages that you'll see in terms of those awards, and just know that we won't be able to make any public announcements until those are provisional and we have met with the NTIA. And then finally, I think last substantive thing that I wanted to hit on, just the subaward details. I know several of you have had questions about fixed amount subawards and what that might look like with some of the new NTIA guidance that has come out. We did want to let you know that the Indiana Broadband Office is going to utilize fixed amount subawards and reimbursement-based subawards where they are needed, but definitely trying to stick with the preference for fixed amount subawards. We think that that's a great option that the NTIA has put out. Really, we mentioned that letter of credit waiver a little bit earlier. There are some really explicit scenarios in that waiver where awards have to be reimbursement based instead of fixed amount. And that's really where we will be trying to use those instead of fixed amount, but again, a preference for those fixed amount subawards. And then just to give you some details about what that will look like, we also have a guidance document that will be coming out to the website shortly talking about this, just so you can get an idea of what the milestones for fixed amount subawards will look like. Those first 2, submitting the project plan and submitting for all relevant permits, those are all going to be before deployment even starts. So like other states, we are taking that example and making some of those award funds available to providers up front. And then the rest will be based on those milestones of locations complete. So you can see kind of across the bottom here, the amount dispersed with each individual milestone, and then what that is of the cumulative total. And I expect questions on this, and we can certainly get back to you on that. So then finally, I think to wrap this up, I know we've talked about resources, but really much of this is in Indiana's Volume 2. I know that that's a really long document, but it will have reference to the BEAD NOFO for many of these questions and exactly where you need to look. And then as Madison mentioned, we also have that really great subgrantee selection guidance document out on the website. That is really the written version of everything that we went over today. So if you have any questions about any of those 2 documents, you can always reach out to the Indiana Broadband Office. I know we've gotten several questions about office hours. We know that project applications a lot of times have proprietary materials, so we're not planning to have office hours at this point. Unless you think that that format would be particularly helpful, but we are planning to be available as we were for pre-qualification to have individual meetings to answer any questions that you have. So you can always reach out to that Indiana Broadband at iot.in.gov and we'll work with you to schedule a meeting or get back to you via email, depending on whatever resource that you need. So with that, I am sure that we have plenty of questions in the chat. Probably don't have time to answer everything that is in the chat, but we will go as far as we can and get back to you in writing. I'm not sure based on how many, if there are like repeated questions where, you know, we can try to cover the ones that were asked most frequently, but Lauren, I will let you take it away with reading the questions.
Yeah, great. The first question is, will the IBO provide a date certain for pre-application expense recovery, if awarded BEAD funding? So for example, are ISPs able to start contracting for design and engineering, permitting, etc. at their own risk, but are allowed to recover these necessary expenses if awarded?
Steve, do you want to take that one?
My apologies. Which question was this?
This was the first question, about the IBO providing a date for pre-application expense recovery.
Yeah, so the date, I don't know, frankly, I don't know the answer to this 100% yet. I do know, just like you've added in the bottom part, that ISPs will be able to start contracting for engineering, permitting, and all of that. But that will be at each ISP's own risk. But assuming those expenses are allowed, then they will be able to be recovered.
Perfect.
We can certainly get back to you guys on a date for that.
Great. The next question is, can the letters of support come from local economic development directors?
I can take this one. Unfortunately not. It is limited to that explicit list that is in volume 2 and on the slides. So certainly reach out if you have an additional question, but it is directly written into volume 2 and was approved by the NTIA about what local government officials are eligible to write that letter of support.
Will the performance bond or letter of credit be required upon award? If not, it will be difficult to determine the subsidy amount prior to award.
So that is actually a requirement in the application phase. And in the application, you do have to submit the subsidy amount that you are asking for. So that should be determined prior to award. There is the opportunity, let's say something gets deconflicted or you add on to your award, adjustments can be made and we can change that letter of credit if needed. But otherwise, the application will specifically ask for that project area for the subsidy amount. And subsequently, you will need to have that appropriate letter of credit or a letter guaranteeing a performance bond.
Next question, are the cybersecurity and risk management plan requirements still the same as communicated before with NIST compliance? And there are some concerns about that being expensive.
Yeah, so we can send out additional guidance documents. This is not fully like a fully NIST compliant cybersecurity risk management plan. There are very specific NIST requirements associated with it. And this is certainly something that is achievable for all of them. We can put you also in touch with our federal program officer if you have additional questions, and they can talk through what has been helpful in other states as well for getting this done.
Additionally, we can set up a call with you specifically to help provide some direct guidance on that too. So,
the next question is about in volume 2, on one page it says census block groups, another page it says census blocks. So just confirming that it is census blocks, not census blocks groups. And then a follow-up question is, can we include census blocks that do not have eligible locations to make an area contiguous?
Yes, you absolutely can. And I apologize. I am almost certainly the person that had the typo of having one place where it says census block groups in volume 2. We have made a small amendment actually to our volume 2 so that in the official approved version, it is all correct. But it's census blocks. And yes, you can go through, you can include a census block that does not have eligible locations to make an area contiguous.
Great. Next question is on the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage details. What is the process for a county or county's wage determination done? Is this necessary if the labor force is not unionized? Is one required for each county that work is performed? And then what is the timeline to complete this?
Steve, I can let you step in on this as well, but I just wanted to say that there is no requirement for Davis-Bacon or prevailing wages. I think maybe you were referencing this at the time when we were asking for wage information for non-union. That is an NTIA requirement that we gather that information. However, it does not have to be prevailing wage. It is just what the wage is.
That's exactly what I was going to state as well. So
Great. Reconnect is allowing one of our staff engineers who is not a certified professional engineer to sign off on documents instead of a professional engineer. If I gave you the USDA's approval notes, would BEAD allow this since they don't have a PE on staff?
I would have to go back explicitly to the BEAD notice of funding, but I do think that the NTIA specific language is about a certified professional engineer. And so we would not be able to take the USDA requirement, but I will take that as a follow-up item to confirm that exact language and get back to you.
Will there be a curing process for application documentation similar to the pre-registration phase?
There will be some sort of curing process. However, if you submit your information on the last day, there will be no curing. We don't have time to have, quite frankly, several weeks of curing and submitting the right information. If you want any of your materials to be checked ahead of time, that would need to be submitted well ahead of the deadline. So if we do receive information, within that 45 days and earlier on in that process, we will review and let you know if something needs to change or you've forgotten a piece, but we cannot guarantee that that will happen as we get closer to the deadline. You should not expect a significant curing process.
I would just add, generally speaking, any applications that we receive 5 days before the deadline and later will probably not receive any curing. We just won't have the capacity to be able to get those back to you in enough time for you to then fix them and resubmit. So as Megan said, the sooner the better.
When deconflicting projects that do not contain identical census blocks, does the score matter or is it purely based on the lowest outlay per BSL? And then is the lowest outlay per BSL calculated based on the overlapping area or the entire project? If an applicant is not awarded its entire project area, will they have an opportunity to negotiate its subsidy request prior to declining the award?
Yeah, I think I did end up hitting on several of those comments later on in the presentation. So if it is just that single census block, then the single census block is based on the lowest BEAD outlay, not the entire score for everything related to that. And then as we talked about, there will be conversation between the internet service provider and the broadband office. So yes, there could certainly be talk about what that subsidy amount would become with those locations removed from the project area. We expect that to be a communicative process and not something that we just assume the amount and tell it to you. That would be something that we certainly communicate on.
For existing or future construction assets to be considered in the matching portion of the subgrantee, what are the criteria to be accepted?
I can send you I can send this individual the NTIA guidance about in-kind match. However, typically existing infrastructure does not count as a part of the matching portion for the subgrant. So I would need to circle back before I told you everything officially, but typically that is not what we have seen.
There's a question about if the IBO will be holding weekly office hours to help participants through the application process.
A lot of people have asked about office hours. So if that is really something that people want to do, I'm happy to say on a call. That being said, I know people before have been hesitant to talk about questions on office hours. So we can take that back internally. Until then, certainly just let us know if you have questions and we can meet with you one-on-one.
We had a lot of those types of conversations with individual providers through the pre-qualification process, knowing that there was confidential information that was being shared that office hours just would not have been able to facilitate. So piggybacking on what Megan said, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team if, in fact, you have specific questions that need to be answered that may be confidential in nature.
Next question is, to be clear, applicants won't be told what the extremely high cost threshold is, correct?
Not before the first round is complete. Again, to make that as accurate as possible, we want to utilize the data from the first round to make that threshold. And then I know that we are right at time. I can stay on for a couple more minutes to continue answering these via chat if people would like. Though, Steve, I'm not sure if you have a hard stop at 3:30.
No, I can stick around as well.
Okay. For anyone else on the call, feel free to drop off if you need to at this point.
The next question is, when will the final project areas be finalized and uploaded on the Indiana website?
So in the first round, internet service providers actually create those project areas. So there will be nothing additional uploaded. They are to be made out of census blocks. It will be in the later rounds where potentially the Indiana Broadband Office designs project areas, and we won't know what those look like until round one is complete because we'll take out everything that was covered during that round. So we'll keep you updated on the timelines for the subsequent rounds.
Are the cybersecurity plans and supply chain risk management plans due upon the submission of round one or before the IBO submits to the NTIA?
They'll be due during round one, so by that February 12th deadline with all the other application materials.
How are letters of support scores calculated for projects that span multiple census blocks? For example, how many points would an applicant receive if they got basic letters from 2 of the 4 census blocks in a project?
Yep, so good question. So it's not based on the census block, it is just overall for the project area. So no matter how big that project area is, whether it's one census block or every single census block in the county, it is just the one letter that gets you between 1 to 5 points. So there's not any kind of averaging. You don't need to try and go get a specific letter per census block. It is just at the project area that you have proposed level.
Is a legal opinion letter also required if an applicant is choosing the letter of credit option?
That's a great question. So the legal opinion letter will only be needed for participants that are actually awarded. So that's not something that has to be submitted during the round of subgrantee selection, but would be something that we gather from you as we work on the subgrant agreement.
If the IBO requires the submission of the cybersecurity and supply chain risk management plans with the application, what protections will the IBO have in place to ensure that these sensitive documents are protected? Have there been any consideration for only asking for these plans from those selected for preliminary awards to limit the amount of exposure?
So I will comment on the second part of the question, and then I'm not sure if Jason from Ready is still here or not. I may have him also talk about some of the protections in place within the Ready system. But what I will say is that we cannot ask for those from those who have been preliminarily awarded only because they could absolutely influence the award. So this is something that is NTIA required that we have to have during the application. Everyone has to submit one. We have to ensure that you actually have that plan to even be eligible to receive an award. So that's why the kind of sequencing of that. And then if Jason is here.
I am still here, Megan. I apologize.
Perfect.
I'll have to ask you to repeat the question though.
Yeah, this one is what protections, this is relating to the cyber and supply chain risk management plans, asking about the protections that are in place to ensure that those sensitive documents remain protected.
Yeah, certainly. So as a software vendor, we have a public and also published security and data privacy policy that we share with the state and all of our customers. We can make that available through the state broadband office.
Perfect.
But it's a pretty standard, but also compliant and relatively rigorous data security and privacy policy that you might be familiar with from any enterprise SaaS vendor like Ready.net.
Great, thank you,
Next,
Jason.
yeah, thanks, Jason. The next question is, can you explain the ability to include census blocks that do not have eligible BSLs to make an application area contiguous? And they're asking for examples of this.
Yeah, so I don't think I can pull one up right off the top of my head, but what I would say is, let's say, I mean, census blocks can be quite close to each other, and there can be non-contiguous census blocks that are quite close to each other just on the basis of what a boundary looks like or a diagonal line or anything like that. So when you're selecting a census block, you are committing to every single eligible location within that census block. So let's say you have one census block here that has eligible locations and one right here that has eligible locations, and then one in the middle that doesn't have any at all. You could select all three of those as your project area and say you're going to, run fiber through the one in the middle, but technically you're not committing to serve any locations in that particular census block. And that would be perfectly allowable. And that enables you to make this all one project area instead of having to submit one over here and one over here. And that also could make a lot more sense for your infrastructure. You may go through that census block anyways. This is also where you can add some of those served locations. Let's say you're running fiber from here to here, and there's an address right on the way in that middle census block that's technically not eligible. I think that's a great example of what we would think of when we're talking about including those served locations that are on the way.
Okay, last two questions. Will a complete list of the questions asked and answered here be publicly provided? If so, what is the ETA on that?
Yes.
So
Go
ahead,
Steve.
Megan. I would say that we will make the video of this publicly available, so that will probably be here shortly when we have approval from the NTIA. We will post this particular website or webinar on our website, and you can have access to all of the questions via the video.
Perfect. And then the last question is, given that the IBO pre-selected census blocks, how does the applicant determine the percentage of unserved for receiving the most scoring for that category?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, the IBO has not pre-selected census blocks. There are census blocks that have eligible locations in them, but internet service providers are welcome to group those census blocks however makes sense for them, as long as they're contiguous. So that calculation is going to highly depending on, whatever, permutation of census blocks. And there are, hundreds of thousands of them in the state of Indiana, what you decide for your particular project area. But one of the really nice things about the Ready system that I like, let's say that you decide to go in and use the map to select your census blocks. It will give you a downloaded list of the location IDs that you have committed to serve within those census blocks. So at that point, you would be able to, if you haven't already done that kind of pre-done analysis, at your organization, you could see then you could calculate quite easily, okay, based on these location IDs, I know the category of each of them, and you could understand then what your score would be. But again, that's going to really depend based on the specific census blocks that you choose.
Okay, one last question came in. Will the NTIA approved locations be available before December 30th?
Yes, truly any second now. We're expecting that approval. So yes, we would not be able to open if not officially approved by the NTIA.
Okay, I think those are all the questions for now.
Great. Thank you all so much for sticking around for these questions. We'll let you know when the recording is posted and when we have that official approval. Thanks so much and have a great holiday.